Hello, hello, and happy Friday. Welcome back to another week of block themes with me, Daisy Olsen. I am pretty excited to be here today. I've been messing around with some fun stuff, and uh, let's see what we can do with some gradient presets for your block theme. You may know that gradients are kind of a thing that is available to you in the block editor, but you might not know just how much fun you can have with them. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let me go ahead and switch over to this is our slide for today. Close that out. Here we go. All right, so now, right now on my screen, you should be seeing no audio. All right, let's try this again. As soon as I switch screens, you probably lost my audio, but if not, then I'm going to repeat myself anyway. um, all right, so we're going to look at gradients today. So what we have here on the screen is the speed build theme that we created a few weeks ago. And I have added a new style variation to this theme. This is not going to replace everything, but it will, it's actually mostly from the 2023 theme, so we might see some weirdness as we maneuver through this if we had any custom named um, styles or anything like that in our content. But all right, so let's see. So where we are now is in the gradient style. If I go into, before we dive into code, I want to just show you some of what is in here. If I go into the palette now, you can see I have apparently a whole bunch of bright colored, I don't know what I was doing there. Hex color, RGB, oh, okay. I was looking at some duotone stuff too, and the different ways that you can set color values, but we can maybe poke our heads in on that at the end. So what I have in here are these, what, 7 gradients. I posted a little preview of what this was going to ultimately look like on Twitter. I should have posted it again today, but social media is hard. So let's just see what happens if we apply some of this. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to take maybe, let's find a good place to put this. Maybe the header. I want to make the group be, I don't know, a solid color of some kind, maybe with a transparency on it. Yeah, let's do that. So we'll make this group, which doesn't cover everything. Actually, the row. Let's do the row instead. So we'll do this transparency color. Oh, I'm still in styles. Okay. Technical difficulties. All right, so background color on this group block, or row block rather. Yeah, I only want the row. I'm going to make this be a transparency. This is a white transparency, and I think it might be a little too transparent. So let's make it a little less transparent so we can still see through what we got. What we had there was actually just completely transparent. I like 99. It seems to be like right in the right spot. All right, so we're going to do that. Okay, so now with that background applied, now on the whole header, or rather maybe just the group, we can go to the color and give it a background. And now we're going to choose one of our fun gradients. So let's try, I really like this one. It's kind of like a white, it's transparent and red. So if this had a white background, it would be, it would show us the whatever the background is behind it, which in this case is black. So now we have these like diagonal, almost like a candy cane style lines going across, and this is just a gradient. So within WordPress, the gradients that we can complete are very simple. Um, we can either do a linear or a radial. Those are the two types available to us. And we can move the colors. We can change the color points. We can add more stop points here. We can change the angle if it's linear. If you change it to radial, then it won't do that. But you can't do any of the really cool, fun things from within WordPress. However, what you're actually doing when you apply a gradient to a background in the block editor is you're setting the background CSS property. So if we go into some, let's do a little bit of looking at what a CSS gradient actually looks like. So if we're in MDN, WebDocs is an excellent resource for anything that you want to do in terms of development, web development. So I would recommend checking that out. And so we are looking at gradient. So the gradient CSS data type. So it's actually a type of image. And what we're actually going to be doing with these is applying a function that our browser understands. And it can be a number of these different functions, and they each do something slightly different, but we're applying this to either the background image in CSS or directly to the background. We don't have a way to access just the background image from WordPress, but we can, through the gradient, access backgrounds. So if we were to go in, let's go ahead and save this and in WordPress and then go back out to our live site, or not actually live site. So if I go ahead and inspect here and see what exactly is happening, I can select the place where I put this gradient, and then I can see here. So basically what happened, what WordPress did when we set that gradient to the group as the background, it added a class to the markup. Let me see if I can make this a little bit easier to read. Maybe we'll move it to the bottom. That might work better. Okay, I think that's going to be easier to read now. All right, so we have the class for our group, the div for our group rather, and then somewhere in here we have this class that was added, has striped gradient background. And what that looks like in the CSS is we have this class, has striped gradient background, and then we have the background set to this information here. It's set to important because we did it from within the editor, so we know we definitely want it to be the thing. And then it's set with a variable. This variable is created in theme.json, and we'll look at that in a moment of how that actually happens. But if we expand it, not there, that's not a good way to expand it. We need to go down to where this is here, and we can see, it's kind of hard to see, there's a whole lot of them here. So we have our preset gradient, striped gradient, and then we can see here that we have a linear gradient function that's being applied. And within that function, we have all of this information. And this is basically all of the parameters that need to go into this linear gradient function in order for the browser to display the gradient in the way that we wanted it to be. So we can see we start with 45 degrees and it's red, and then 25 degrees and it's transparent. So 45 degrees, and then we have 25% red, and then 25% transparent, and then 50% transparent. And basically it just keeps going through all that. And this ends up being these stripes, horizontal or diagonal stripes. And then at the end, this is kind of like a trick for it, At the end, we have some of the shortcut CSS to finish this out outside of that linear gradient rule. And the reason that this works is because it's set to the background. If the gradient were being applied to background image, for example, it goes away because now this gradient preset is broken. It isn't just an image. It's actually it's part of the whole background. So just like you can set things like generic padding here, for example, you could set the padding to be a single value and then the browser will break that out into 4 parts. You can do the same thing with background where it breaks it out into all of its subparts. And there are a bunch of them for background. So here, if we expand this, we can see a whole bunch of things listed: background image, position X, position Y, size, all of these things. And we could declare all these separately, but you can also, if you know the rules of how to combine them into a single line, you can do a whole lot of stuff. And we have to, in this case, if we want it to be all baked into our preset, it has to be all in one single line in our theme.json. So let's go back to our gradient rule, and we're looking at the linear gradient here. So if we look and see what goes into a linear gradient, we can kind of read through the syntax here. So this first one, these are all examples of some linear gradients. And we could say this linear gradient is tilted 45 degrees. It starts with blue and finishes with red. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward, right? Like we could probably plug that in and it would probably be a fade, a diagonal fade from blue to red, from left to right. And the others do all the same, similar things, but you can get really creative and add more and more and more information to these to create some pretty cool stuff. I can't get into all of the details of exactly how you create gradients here. And I did 2 things to get the ones that I tried. One is I asked ChatGPT. I did it. AI helped me here. And I asked for complex gradients just to get some examples. And I modified them just a little bit to work with my theme.json file. And I got what I got. And then I went out to CSS Tricks, who that site has so much history going back years and years and years, and so much creativity that you can learn from. Highly recommend it. And so I used some of the gradients from there, and I tweaked them a little bit here and there. But let's go ahead and see what exactly these gradients look like in our theme.json file. So if I switch over to, actually, I think I have it here somewhere. Here we go. If I switch over to my IDE, I am looking at my misspelled gradients JSON file. It is my, it's a style variation. So it's almost like a child of my theme. It's not a child theme, but it's a child of the theme JSON file. Yeah, so there's another resource in the chat here. Let me see if I can throw that up on the screen. I'll check that out. I'm not familiar with that one, but I'm always looking for new inspiration, so thank you for sharing. All right, so in here, some of this is not relevant to what we're doing today because I was experimenting with some other things. Excuse me. All right, gradients. So here are all of the gradients that I created. This first one, let me see if we can get a little bit more on the screen here. Hopefully that's text is okay for everyone. We've got a linear gradient that tilts 135 degrees. It starts with this bright pink at 0%. And then at the 25% mark, it switches to this teal color or aqua color. And then we move into this salmony color at 50%. And then at the 75%, we go to this blue, different salmon color, a little more pink, I guess. And I called this multicolor diagonal gradient. So I created this post. Let's go ahead and go into it and we can see all the gradients that I made. There we go. And it looks awful because reasons. Let me get rid of the sidebar here. We actually want to go to single, and I want to edit this, and I'm going to go here, and I'm going to get rid of I'll get rid of this column. Group that. Oh, that didn't work. All right. I really just want this up here. Okay, that should be better. Huh. Interesting. I wonder why that block is broken. But that is not today's problem. Let's go back into our post again. That looks better. Okay. So I set this post up on a different site and I just pasted it into this one just a few minutes ago. So here we can see this first one is, I can take this link off the screen, sorry about that. So this first one is this gradient that I just described where it kind of like goes through these colors at that 145-degree angle, I think it was. That's the first one. The second one is what's called a radial gradient. It's a different function with some different rules, but you can make that circle that kind of goes out. And then the rest of these are all like kind of like really out of the box type ideas. This one is this red and black one. On the test site that I did, it was actually red and white because I had a white background, but I didn't catch that it was a transparency instead of a color. I was going for candy cane, but this is what I got here. These are hard stop points. Instead of having it fade from one color to the next, it just stops and it moves directly to the next color. So you can create this striped effect. And we can look at the code for that. This next one over here is a little different. This one is called a conical gradient, and it's not necessarily the most widely supported of the gradient options, so your mileage may vary. And what it's doing is we have a repeating gradient here, so it's repeating itself every like 50 pixels or something like that in squares, and then it's like that burst of to make it conical. So if you think of it like you're looking down on a cone where you see the point at the top and then it kind of gets wider at the bottom, and imagine that it was faceted so that you were seeing like all of the different angles from the top down, and that's kind of the effect that you're getting here. This next one, I love this plaid look here. It's just CSS and some colors. It's just a regular gradient. It's actually multiple gradients that are kind of pushed together in order to make this. So as you can see, like you can stack gradients on top of gradients and create some really interesting things. And here we have a polka dot option. Again, it's like a gradient combined with another gradient. And then this last one over here is a little different. We have just like a basic gradient, but then we put some hard stops also to make the squares. And then there's an SVG that lays over the top of the whole thing to give it the rounded corner effect. So it's kind of cheating because we're doing a lot more than just a gradient in this case, but these are all just plugged into my gradient presets. I can use them anywhere on the site that will support a gradient. Gradients are only for backgrounds, at least at the moment. But I did have this, I had a little bit of fun with creating a gradient that would go over text. And this requires a little bit of custom CSS. because it requires some WebKit and like off the outside of the unofficial CSS that is commonly understood by all browsers. Uh, it used to be a lot more common that you would have to use a lot of these WebKit or Mozilla kind of like bake rules. They actually have a name I can't remember. So let's go back to our code here. And so this black watch gradient that I made, this is that plaid kind of look. Let me wrap the text because it's really a long line. Okay, and then maybe I'll make it a little bigger. Nope. Okay. So if I look at this black watch gradient, so I'll just step through it. So first we have our repeating linear gradient. That is another function. It's similar to linear gradient, but it's actually going to repeat itself. This one is actually using an RGBA value, so there's a transparency. I'm not exactly sure what color it is, red or black or gray. I guess those were the colors involved. So we have that, and then after that is a 0 pixel value, which I am not entirely sure what that is doing in the whole overall background rule. We could probably break it down and see what it is. Actually, that's a great idea. Let's do that. This is going to be a lot easier if we do it that way. So we're going to inspect here. We're going to let the inspector do some of the work for us. So if I go into the black watch one, and instead of letting the preset be here, I'm going to copy this whole thing up into where the variable is. Okay, and that just replaced it. It's the same information, but now we can actually like let the browser's inspector let us kind of play with it a little bit and see what's really happening. Because now what we have is this, we can expand this out and see what all of the values are from a CSS perspective of how everything is being broken out into its components. So actually this is entirely gradient. That's interesting. It's all just background image. So all of this stuff here, the stacked linears, is just set to the background image. And then everything else is set to initial because there aren't any rules for those things. So if I change this one, the background image, it just keeps it. So this one is truly just a gradient. It's a very complex gradient, kind of cool gradient, but that's all it is. So let's see what happens if we go over and do the same thing with this polka dot one. Take that in there. Where did my background go? That's interesting. I see it here, but it didn't seem to apply it. It doesn't seem to like that. Oh, there's some other background. It doesn't have important now, that's why. There we go. Okay, the black background was taking precedent because it's actually set to the background dash color instead of just background. So, all right, so now what we have here in this one is more than just a straight up gradient. So we have our gradient rule here. Sorry. We have our gradient rule here, radial gradient, and it's got all of the different things that needs to go in. And we actually have 2 radial gradients in here. and they're separated by a comma. So we can apply multiple gradients to one CSS rule. And then we also have a background position, and it's basically saying on the first radial, I want it to be to the left, and on the second radial gradient, I want it to be at 50 pixels. And it does, and then we have top and 50 pixels for the second one. And so one of the gradients is handling the dark colored polka dots, and the other one is handling the light colored polka dots. And so we're telling it what to do. And then we're saying we want each polka dot to be 100 pixels by 100 pixels. And then the background color is set to be the lighter blue, or that medium blue color. And then let's look at this one. This middle one is the repeating conic gradient. And this one is a little, it's not super complicated in terms of the code that's used. But as I said before, it is definitely like a, your mileage may vary because especially mobile browsers or anyone with an older device may not see this, but we're going to look at that too. So, so here we have this. So we have our background image, which is just the single repeating conic gradient with all of the things inside of it, all of the colors and percentages that are needed. And then we have a background size of 40 pixels. So it's each square is 40 pixels by 40 pixels, basically. And then it repeats. If I took the repeating out, let's see what we get. Oh, that's funky. Okay. So without the repeat, it makes this like triangle look. Interesting. And I think it's because we've got more blue happening than red happening. Now, if I took out some of these other rules, the center top and 40 pixels, 40 pixels, well, that does that. So it makes it just a single radial gradient. You can see if we make it so you can see the whole block or the whole area, it's kind of going into the center. And if you imagine that it's also doing other lines to bring it around, that's the conic gradient thing. But if we go ahead and make this the same as it was, and we remove the size, then we just get a single gradient because it's filling the space. And I think that if we did got rid of the repeating, nope, we still need it to repeat, so it goes the whole way around. So that's kind of interesting. All right. This kind of sunbursty looking one is just a radial gradient with a whole bunch of colors equally distributed. So it's like all it does is it sets it so it says it's a circle and then it goes out. I don't know what else I could do besides circle. I wonder. Let's see how well the inspector lets us play with things. Do we do a square? No. I don't know if I can do anything other than a circle. Let's go find out. That was a radial gradient. So let's go look at the docs for this function. So this one has circle at center. So that's a position of the gradient. Okay, so you can, the ending shape, it can either be a circle or an ellipse. So let's try changing that to ellipse. Did I spell it wrong? Ellipse. Hmm. Is there an extra character at the end? Oops, I lost it. That's why it's broken. There we go. Now we have an oval. That's kind of cool. All right, so we looked at this first gradient, the second gradient, the third one. I don't remember. Did we actually look at that one? Yeah, it's got the 40 pixel stripes basically. But this last one is kind of different. So let's see. Let's go find this one. So this one actually has an SVG baked into it. Okay. That didn't work. Okay. There we go. So we have a whole bunch of stuff going on here. So let's see if we can break it down. So we start off with our SVG first, which is like it's a URL function that expands out the SVG. SVG is just this code. There's no actual image. It's an XML sort of thing. You can actually create very complex things with SVGs if you know what to do. I copied and pasted this, so full disclosure. Repeating linear gradient here, and that's got a whole bunch of stuff going on it. To the right, transparent, and then it starts at transparent, and then it goes to transparent, and then it goes to white, and then it goes to white. And then we have another repeating gradient. And then we have a linear gradient. It's 45 degrees, pink, sky blue. So if we took the SVG out of this, the only thing that should happen, the only thing that should happen is it goes to squares. So now we just have squares. If we took out repeating, then not much happens. That's interesting. We do have a repeat here. That also doesn't seem to do much. Maybe it's just like determining that it needs to repeat since we have these other, since we have the 55 pixels, there should be a 55 pixel square. Interesting. It looks like it is still repeating here down because this still has repeating. So I'm just seeing if I can get it to be just a single square with those linears. There it is. And it's just blue. It apparently doesn't have any of the pink in it because of how small it is. It's too small to show all of the gradient. It's there a little tiny bit down in this corner, but you can barely see it. So that is some cool gradient stuff. I think there are tools you can create gradients with these tools. How advanced they are, I don't really know. Some of them might be just as simple, or I shouldn't say it's simple. The gradient builder in WordPress is fine. it will do basically most of the work that you want to do, because it just like here, I can add in more stop points. I can change the colors of those stop points. I can change the direction and angle of the gradient. It looks like I could even, from here, I could actually even include an image. That is not something that we can do in WordPress. But probably most of these are going to be similar to this, with the stop points at different places, and a color, and a transparency. But if we wanted to try to do this on text, let me see if I have that into this file here. Don't remember which one I did. Heading. All right, so I had the heading set to use the kind of gradients, and then in the custom CSS for H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6, I put in the CSS that is needed to make it actually work. There's a background clip this first one doesn't really do anything. It just, the inspector yelled at me when it wasn't there for some reason. Then WebKit background clip and WebKit text fill color to transparent. So what it's basically saying is I want you to clip the background of all of the letters so that the background is only behind the actual characters. And then I want you to fill the characters transparent so the background comes through from behind. And then we have to do the same thing for Mozilla here. But let's go ahead and look what that looks like. I think, let me see what we've got. I think that I had to, why is this not here already? I don't know. I thought it would have just happened. It might be because I need to have an actual heading and not the post title. Or maybe I actually have to apply the gradient. See what happens on the front end. I know I had this working. I might have to go look at my other site for a second and see. It looks like it's actually using the fallback. WP preset gradient, repeating conic gradients. Did I change the title maybe? It's the letter S. Huh. Okay. Let's try reloading this now. Nope. Darn it. Appearance editor. And, oh. This is actually coming through. Gradient. So this is using the red that I have. So this is something else to be aware of. Um, Color gradient. That's the background CSS property. Okay. So we're setting the gradient. So for styles, elements, heading, yeah, that should work. The heading, or I could try just doing H2 maybe. Color gradient, and then I'm setting it to be a variable of this preset. And it doesn't seem to want to do it. And I'm not sure why. Let's look in the CSS. Oh, it's still pulling in the wrong information here. There we go. All right. I guess there's something funky going along. Did I save as custom style? Maybe that could be it. Let's go into this here and reset defaults. Okay. Oh, that brought it back to my other style. Now it's working. Okay, so it must have had it was pulling that style from the database. I think that's something that happens when you use a style variation, is it pulls it in to merge it in with the main theme.json file, and it's not really using the file anymore. So you have to kind of undo it and then redo it. So it redoes that merging. But now we can see we have this text. I'm going to make it a different font so that it's a little easier to see. On the front end would be easier. Okay. Reload. There we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and change this 100 pixels. There we go. And maybe font weight bolder. That doesn't do anything with this font. Looking for a nice bold font where you can really see what's happening here. Well, we'll use monospace, and then we're going to go to text transform. Do uppercase. Okay. And we're going to make this a lot bigger. 400 pixels. And now we can see we have our text that has this gradient applied to it. So, yeah, that's how you would do it. So what it looks like here is the background clip doesn't do anything. It's actually giving me a warning saying this isn't a thing. The WebKit background clip is set to clip to text. So it's clipping around the text. And then the text fill color is set to transparent, because now that allows the background to come through, what's left of it. And then the Mozillas are crossed out because they don't apply to my browser, which is Chrome. If I were in Firefox, they would use these ones instead. But other than that, it's the same rules. Um, I don't know if these will ever get added into the formal spec, but this is the way that we do it right now. All right. So we are done a little bit early today. Is there anything anyone would like to chat about or know, or anything I can help with? Any questions about what we talked about today? I'm happy to keep going if there's interest. Otherwise, I'll let you have the rest of your Friday back. Uh, so, wondering about inline styles. So, if are you talking about like inline styles that you would put right into your content? All right, so when we add options to blocks like padding and margin. Okay, so let's go ahead and, so the way that we would get an inline would be to go edit a post. Let's add in some text. Paragraph. Um, so now we've got our paragraph. Oh, okay, I see. So here's kind of like the basics of the question is that inline styles are bad. Um, they're not exactly bad, but they are kind of limiting. Um, so if you have inline styles that you apply specifically to a block, let's go ahead and do that. We're gonna make these huge margins and maybe add a huge padding, lots and lots of space around that. Okay. If we go out to the front end, when we go out to the front end, we see that nothing actually happened. It didn't apply it. Why didn't it apply it? Here it is. Okay. Caching. So I think that if you only want this to always forever and ever have this style, then inline styles are the way to go. But when you start adding inline styles to things that you might want to change later, yeah, it could potentially cause problems. This is one of the arguments that you might hear about the separation of your presentation layer or your styling from your content. And when you add those inline styles in, then you're pulling them back together. um, in this case, though, if you look at the way that this code actually is, it is an inline style, but it's kind of like an inline style the way that you would see in a CSS framework, kind of. Not exactly, but it's pulling in a variable. It is not actually hard coding the margin or the padding directly into your markup. What's happening, at least in this case, is we're pulling a preset in and it's saying, I want this to be the preset of spacing 80. Now, 80 is a number and it could get confusing if you wanted 80 to be 40 in the future. So you could like use the t-shirt size method, small, medium, large, extra large, which is sometimes you might see that in WordPress's interface. I like the semantic naming approach where you're like maybe making it a little bit more flexible for future you to understand what you were doing. And you can set spacing presets in WordPress. This one is a default one, I think. So now some things might truly be inline styles, but I think inline variables are not such a bad thing. It's kind of a happy medium maybe between. So if you go to oh, what is it? There's a CSS framework. It's Tailwind. If you look at the way that Tailwind CSS works, it's actually adding all these classes in, and they actually are doing a methodology that really isn't semantic. They're saying, okay, the BG, which is background, slate, which is the color, and 100, which is probably the hue, maybe? I don't actually know for sure. I haven't really studied all of the naming conventions that they use, but it's very descriptive. And what you get is a really human readable version of your markup, but all your classes are going to be baked in, and the way that they're named, it's kind of like inline styles, even though technically um, they could be changed at the framework level, right? So yeah. um, I think that the creator of this framework actually has some thoughts on um, why semantic naming in CSS doesn't work in the long term, that it actually creates um, more trouble in the long run as far as maintaining your code. Uh, but a framework like this, I can read this. I don't know this framework very well, but I can say, okay, well, W24 is probably a width of 24 of something. I don't know what the unit of measurement is. Height of 24 is 24 of something. I don't know what that measurement is. But if I knew what this was, the 24, 24, 48 were referring to, I can kind of intuitively guess that where a W would be width and a H would be height. I can guess that BG is background and that slate is probably like a dusty blue color, maybe. And that 100 is probably the hue, but I don't know that for sure. We'd have to look at the actual CSS that's coming in order to see what's actually happening. But we know that it's being applied to a figure here, and I assume that the figure is um, this image, all of this wrapping, whatever's wrapping around it. And I know rounded XL is probably telling me what I want the radius of the corners to be. So um, yeah, so this is a different methodology. It's not the one that WordPress is using. Maybe you could like twist the arm of WordPress really, really hard to make this work. I think you could potentially add a whole bunch of custom classes into the advanced section of your blocks, but I wouldn't want to do that. Kind of that would be wonky. And people ask about using Bootstrap, which is another framework. It's a little different. It's based on a grid layout, and you actually load in JavaScript, and um, I don't know. It's just a different way of going about things. But the WordPress way is mostly these variables. They're trying to stick pretty close to vanilla CSS at the end of the day, which I really like. I like the idea of using variables. There are things that I might do differently. I might expand things out. Like maybe gradients really should only be the background image, but then we should also be able to set all of the other background specifics beyond that. I don't know. Maybe that's the way it'll be one day. Right now it's not, and chances are, because it's already out there, we'll never get quite there because of backwards compatibility. If we put out a version of WordPress that applied the gradient only as a background image, then anybody who had done what I demonstrated today would end up with a broken site, which actually brings me to one other thing I wanted to mention, and that is that if you have a variable, like here in our styles in styles.cs, or in, theme.json, I have this style that's setting the h2 element to have a color. In the color set, in the color styles, I have the gradient set to this variable. If this variable doesn't exist, then your browser is going to go back to some default. It's not really going to know what to do with it. But if I add a comma before the closing parentheses, I add a comma and then I give it some other definitely good value, like let's say blue, or we could say we want it to be I don't know why that color is always in my head, but I end up using it as an example every single time. We can give it back like a fallback. So if you put variables into your stuff here, you can always use a fallback to give it something else to use. So if I break this again, and I'm going to have to go, let's see, if I go into the styles editor again, and I save that, and I save that, and I reload this. This should maybe, oh, I gotta reset, and this is clunky. Reset to defaults, save, go back to here and save. And it's still using the wrong version. Why? What should have happened is if I break this gradient variable, and eventually it might catch up, but something in WordPress likes to cache these files. If I change it to red, so this variable is broken, it doesn't actually exist because I added the S to it, I can switch this, it falls back to the red, so that after the comma is what's going to go there instead. And I could actually give it a different variable to be the fallback too, theoretically. So if I wanted to say I want to use vivid red, I know that vivid red should always exist on WordPress because it's a default color. Don't know if that's going to work or not. It doesn't work. Okay, so let's try. Can you use a var inside of a var? Sounds pretty meta to me. You can use a var inside of a var. Look at that. Interesting. So I have now set this to be a fallback of a different CSS variable that I'm pretty confident will always exist. And then if I go back and I make this valid again, then it goes back to my other preset. So, yeah. All right. Well, I think if there are no other big questions, I would love to wrap this up for this week. And I'm thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do next week yet. So, but on the last Friday of this month, that's the third Friday from today. So I'll be here next week, but not the week after. I don't know. I will be away. Whatever that Friday is, the last Friday of April. So, yeah, so if anyone has any thoughts about what topic you'd like me to experiment with, I'd love to hear it. Please leave something in the comments on this video on YouTube. And otherwise, keep keep on WordPressing, and I will see you all next week. Thanks.